Hey guys, in this watercolor and oil painting tutorial, I'm going to show you the process of one of my paintings that I did for the monthly Bad Apple Artists Collective auctions. This painting is created both with watercolors and oil paint, so it's gonna be exciting, I hope. This is something that I wanted to try out for a long time. I actually painted this one before I painted my love spell painting. I kind of didn't got to make this video, so this was the first painting I did in a combination with watercolors and oil paints. I always thought that watercolor might set together nicely with oil painting, and I felt it would look very beautiful. Watercolor creates these abstractions and you can fill out areas very quickly. Plus, this medium offers you some beautiful tools for making interesting backgrounds, whereas with oil paints you can be super fine and infuse a very rich body and heavy depth into your painting, especially when painting skin tones. When painting skin with oils, it's almost like actual flesh. So I thought combining the two might be perfect, and I decided to try it out. Obviously, I didn't just mix watercolors and oil paints together directly, although this is what some of my followers thought I did. But I did not. In this video, I will show you the process of my last painting. It has sold now, but if you are interested, there's also a 3-hour-long painting video available on my Patreon page. That version is way slower than this YouTube video and almost plays in real time. So if you are interested in that, just follow the link in the video description. If you are generally interested in longer and step-by-step painting lessons, join me on Patreon and get access to over 60 painting videos and tutorials about watercolors, oils, color pencils and mixed media techniques. Depending on which reward tier you would like to join, you will receive beautiful art gifts from me every month, embellished fine art prints, original watercolor illustrations and even your own custom oil painting. You can also join my monthly painting live stream in which I answer all your questions. As always, I started out with a Photoshop mockup that I created based on photos I shot myself, combined with images I photographed of a local model. I created this mockup in Photoshop, which I then traced onto my watercolor paper. The paper I used, as always, is Fabriano Extra White watercolor paper. I have all the materials I used in the description of this video, so if you want to buy them for yourself, you can go and get them there. Then I just started filling out the main areas of the painting. I wanted to paint the background first because I was very curious how these abstract effects would look on the background. I filled in this area using a wet in wet technique. First, I applied a layer of slightly toned water with a little bit of blue around the figure. Then I just dropped in my brush in the watercolor and touched the surface of the watercolor paper, and the color bled out onto the area. It automatically created these beautiful abstractions. Then I continued with the skin colors and focused on the arm and face. I mixed the color and applied it onto the remaining areas using a lot of wet on wet techniques. I noticed that because I used this technique, the hair was bleeding out on the background and it created these super beautiful patterns. I also used salt on the wet areas like in the hair, and though I didn't record this, you can see when I added it on the painting, the salt sucked up the water and it created beautiful cloud effects. Then for the leaves and foliage, I had to let the area dry a bit. To speed up this process, I almost always use a hairdryer. Then over the dried areas, I added shapes and foliage. This was of course only the first layer, and I added some additional layers later. For the face, I was painting relatively freely and loosely because I knew I would paint a whole layer of oils on top of this area. I wasn't specifically accurate when I painted the face initially, and it was probably unnecessary to paint it all because I went over the whole face with oil paints anyway. But I liked how the face turned out in the watercolor, and I think it had a really nice abstract feel to it with all the loose shapes. I didn't add any gradients, I just added shape on shape, building up to the color. Since I took the reference picture myself, I had a lot of beautiful skin tones to choose from. In every skin tone you have blues and greens and browns, and I just add them onto the face and mix them intuitively and edit them onto the paper. And then I would mix the next color and edit until I was happy. Also, the face is very large compared to the sizes of faces I would normally paint with watercolors. This was a perfect size for painting using this style, because I realized I could add so many details that I would normally not have the capacity to paint into a very small face because of the limited space as compared to a large face. It was a very interesting experience and I really liked how the face turned out. The flowers were especially amazing to paint because with oil paint it is really difficult to paint flowers on canvas. When you have to paint flower petals, you have to include a lot of characteristics and details onto every flower petal, and they have to have very sharp edges. When I paint them on canvas, it is very difficult to get these hard edges because canvas tends to smooth out every brush stroke and you kind of get the opposite effect, which is annoying. But with watercolor it is a perfect medium because I could make all of these hard edges and make a lot of flower petals at once. I didn't completely mimic them 100% based on the reference though. I always try to make them more abstract and loose, which I find is very beautiful and also fun to do. After I was happy with how the flowers looked, I continued painting into the areas that still needed color, like some of the dark areas of the hair. I didn't just use black though, I used a mixture of indigo, blue, purple, black and brown. So I had nice, rich and complex dark areas featured in the painting. Then I could finally start to paint with oils. At this point I mounted my painting on my easel so I could work in my usual painting position. When I work with watercolors, I usually paint on the tabletop surface so that the paints can bleed into each other. But that position is super bad on my back and my neck, so the best position is on the easel. I started right away with the face and it was super interesting to work over this base of watercolor. I kind of covered up the complete face with white paint because although it might not be visible on the video, you can see very strongly the differences between where the watercolor paint and the oil paint was. Whenever I added oil paint, I could still see the areas where there were watercolors, so I had to completely cover the face with oils. And I didn't really blend a lot of the paint. I just used the same technique I used with watercolor. I just mixed a bit of skin tone and applied that to the paper and then moved on to my next tone. When you paint on paper instead of canvas, you can get many more details than on canvas. It is such a huge difference. It's also harder at times because it can be an unforgiving surface. With canvas, every brush stroke automatically blends into every other brush stroke, so the blending process is almost implemented by simply using the materials. But on paper, you have to blend every brush stroke individually, and the way the paint is applied on the surface is different. For example, when you mix a certain color and you add it to another color on canvas, it would blend into the other colors. If you mixed a pink tone, it would automatically blend into the other pink tones already painted on the canvas. But on paper, the color remains the same when you apply it. So you have to be very accurate when you mix colors, because every time you add a variation of color, it looks exactly on the paper as on the palette. And it does not really blend. It's as if you were painting in Photoshop and you choose to use a certain shade of color to paint an area. Whatever color you choose is the color you get. It is difficult to explain, but if you wanted to try it out for yourself, you would probably see the difference too. It is harder, but the result is beautiful. I was able to add so many variations and skin tones, and I could add more details to the eyes as well using the technique. Plus, I could paint them finer too. Overall, it was more accurate to paint on paper and completely different from canvas, so I really enjoyed it. The same advantage applied when I painted the roses roses. I could add so many additional flower petals, and they each had beautiful sharp edges that you need to have in flower petals. When painting on canvas, they oftentimes had one sharp edge and some blurry edges, so every individual petal looked different. They are definitely easier to paint on paper or wood rather than canvas because of the uniformity of the flower petal edges. Then I continued working on the arm, and I wanted to preserve the watercolor effects I had added previously. In order to do this, I added a lot of liquid paint medium to make very transparent paint, and then I added that onto the paper. And I tried to only carefully add these layers. Because I sealed this painting, it was no problem for me to just wipe them off if I wasn't happy with them. I added a lot of paint to the background using both transparent and opaque paint, but I didn't want to cover all my watercolor effects, so whatever I was unhappy with, I just wiped it off. The thing that was most amazing for me to paint were the butterflies. They are so difficult to paint on canvas because you can't get fine enough to paint edges and the paint blends into each other. Using these materials, I was able to add so many details in one session, and because they didn't blend into each other, I could paint all of the butterflies in one evening. I think they were the best butterflies I ever painted, and I really adored them. In the end, I decided to make the hair a bit darker. Using artist paint tape, I taped the face so that I didn't paint over it, and then I used an old brush which had very spread out hairs, and I painted over the hair areas, and this old brush could add a nice stroke effect that looked really good. I also added many details here and there and some color variations too. I added layer effects by mixing different colors, pinks on top of yellows or translucent layers here and there, just to get some extra colors into the composition. I didn't record that part of the process because I wasn't sure how it would look when I was working on it, but you can see the results in the final painting. And I am super happy with how the painting turned out in the end. And since I wanted the face to be super perfect, I also added a third layer onto it, which is another part of the video that I didn't record unfortunately, but I used the same process as I used for the first two layers. But I paid more attention to blending using a dry brush, and I tried carefully to blend in all the layers so that it looked very smooth and perfect. And that is the process I used to create my Lucid Dreaming painting. This painting may seem very special and different than my other paintings, and that is because I used the watercolor effects and oil paints together. If you want to see an almost real-time version of this video, come over to my Patreon page or my website and support me at the $10 reward level. The real-time video also includes added features like how I paint the butterflies and roses, so you can try it out for yourself. Before we end the video, I wanted to proudly announce the winners of LIOBA'S Painting Challenge, a creative contest that I hold every month for my patrons. The theme for October was spooky, and the first place goes to Amurinette, who created this beautiful night scene. Congratulations, Amurinette! You will win a print and an art surprise package. She also has a YouTube channel, by the way, so don't forget to check it out. Also, don't forget to check out the art of the other places who won the challenge. I included the Instagram usernames, so you should be able to find them on Instagram. To learn more about my painting challenge, just visit my website. Have fun! If you liked this video, please leave a comment, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. See you next time. Bye bye!